If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone.
Is it a girl?
I think it is. That's cool. It goes for a while.
Yeah, that stuff's definitely worth buying.
Name the fire.
Oh, sheep. No, that's a car. No, that's a...
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I hope you're all doing good. This is getting filmed during Texas 2K, so maybe you're down there enjoying that. Hopefully you didn't get too wet when it rained. Looks like there's lots of fun and excitement. I saw that Miles ran a 770 in a street car. When you think about how that's slightly less than a 2-liter 4-cylinder, it's pretty crazy. And yes, he does drive it to Starbucks to go get coffee, so it is a legit street car. So that kind of goes hand in hand with what we're going to talk about today. As you can see in the picture, it is the drive-by-wire throttle body from the Evo that we covered in the drive-by-wire tips and tricks episode. This is a continuation of that, plus we're going to kind of talk about some of the things that I chose to do and why, which will lead into the second half, possibly yet a third episode, or maybe just a spin-off on what tables should you be copying from an OEM ECU. A lot of OE strategies that are really awesome. We're going to talk about one of them in relation to drive-by-wire in this particular video. So we covered prior how we can use drive-by-wire versus boost target. So we can overspring a car, we can make it do what we want. I happen to have another example of that exact scenario. Oddly, almost the same amount of spring, but definitely things reacted a little bit differently. This time it was a Subaru STI rather than an Evo. Similar engine size though. The Evo was a 2.3 liter. This is a 2.5, of course. 22 pounds of spring, 21 and a half, something like that. We're not going to get into the specifics so much of setting up the table because those numbers are always going to be different. That's the main thing. Your numbers are going to be different than my numbers. I'm just giving you an idea. I'm not saying that what you're going to see is the only way to do it. So first of all, let's switch to the Haltech software real fast. We're going to see a very similar pedal translation versus boost target table. This one you can see has a little bit higher values because VE, cam timing, whatever you want to blame it on, it just wasn't the same. Even though we had the same wastegate spring, it took more duty cycle or more drive-by-wire position for a given boost level. But you can see right here we're back to 1-to-1 by 21 pounds, right? So that part's the same. Now, I did decide to incorporate an additional strategy that it took me a second to figure out how to make it work. I wanted to do it on the Evo, but I had kind of failed. So let's switch to those tables and go over what I did and how it worked, and then why I did it. So let's move to the max TPS table, which is down here. Let's see what that one is doing. So when we switch to max TPS, it's going to look a little bit different than it did on the Evo. We have very similar boost control target as an axis on the left. On the top, we have boost pressure error absolute. So that's variation from the target. So it's floating. But just think of it as 0 is your target. Anything less than that is below, and anything above that is an overboost situation. So I started with some very generic numbers, but obviously I had kind of an idea of what it would take to knock the boost down, and we covered that in the last one. Again, these are imaginary numbers. It might be a good starting point, but it's not the only way to do it. The way the feedback works, once you have that all set up, it should kind of take care of itself between the drive-by-wire and between the boost control duty cycle. And we'll see that when we switch to the log side. But if you notice down below, the bottom of your screen, right now it says off boost says closed loop active, it says overboost or TPS limit. So that is boost control state. So you need to make a 4D table out of this if you're using a Haltech. Now, if you're using an M-Tron, you're using a Motec, you're using a Motec Max ECU, how you're going to set this up is going to be a little bit different. I probably said Motec twice. AEM, you can't really do this, but unfortunately, maybe Holley will fix that now that they own them. At any rate, for the Haltech, this is what it's going to be. This axis is going to be boost control state. So if we go to closed loop active, you're going to see that the values in the tables are all the same because I'm not done setting it up. So I just made all 4 of them the same. But we're primarily worried about when it kicks to overboost. So this is it trying to maintain the target. This is when we have a problem. So we very well could set all of this to 100. Definitely an off boost, we could do that. But that's not really too critical because if it's under boost, it's under boost. It'll be the 0 or -1, right? So the pedal's going to do what it's told to in the pedal to throttle table. But now when we get to the overboost, it's going to start peeling the throttle back. Now I know in my Civic, as an example, on the AEM, 10% boost on a big turbo on a big motor, or 10% TPS rather, taking that out, that was a huge loss when I was having problems with the GM throttle. I lost 100 wheel. It really knocked it into the dirt. I went from 1,070, I think, down into the 9s. Like it really murdered it. So again, some of this is going to be application specific. This particular car is a 6466. So what I consider pretty average for most street cars that are trying to make 700 horse, at least in the 4-cylinder realm. Even a V6. This turbo worked really good on a 3.2 liter V6 that I had when the car was kind of a street car still. But anyway, you might notice a difference if you're on a 72 millimeter or an 83, or if you go the other way and you're on a really small turbo and you want to use these safeties, you might have to really get more aggressive. For instance, if you were running an Evo 10 and you wanted to run 0 inches of vacuum, where maybe this car, I'm going to switch to the pedal to throttle, is 27% to run 9 pounds. An Evo 10 on a stock turbo is 21, 22, something like that, depending on the turbo being used. So, and that's 0. But this, 27%, got us 9. So some of this is going to be relative to the turbo, and it's going to be relative to the wastegate spring. So again, these numbers only barely a starting point, but kind of gives you an idea. So this is what your table would be. Drive-by-wire max throttle position in your ECU, whatever they may call that. I did boost pressure error is my top axes. I did my boost to target as the left, X and Y. I always get them backwards, but whichever it is, you guys can figure that one out. In a table, something like this. So that if it was 1 pound over target, it would knock it down 18%. 82 would become the max. 2 pounds, it'd be 73. Basically 70 at 2.5, etc., etc. You might not need this resolution. I just did it for the sake of the video. So now let's switch to the log, and we're going to see this in use, and we're going to go over 6 different data points, I think it is, and see how they all relate. So let's switch to our Haltech data log workspace. I'm going to use that instead of doing it inside the NSP software, just so that we have a little less cluttered look at what's going on. For me, it's easier when I see it in a graph sometimes. So that's where we're going to do it in that particular case. One tuner's like, I don't even understand why you use the workspace. And he's right. You don't have to. Just for sake of teaching, I find it a little easier. I know in the Infinity, I definitely don't use AEM data. I just use the internal software. You can do that in a Haltech. You can do that in a lot of ECUs. Motec, I do believe you have to run it in in IQ or I2 or whatever that one is. But anyway, let's switch to the Haltech data log workspace. So we already have gone over setting up the Haltech data logger and building a workspace. As you can see, I have this particular page is named Boost Control, and I have 3 different tabs. I just wanted to make sure that each page I had sufficient data to correlate, so that as I'm reviewing a log, in this case this was a street pole, that I can look at everything after the fact very easily. So let's start first with manifold pressure. So we can see that we start down here. I don't happen to have the RPM trace up, but we can see the boost starts to build, and I'm probably going too fast, but if you're watching the numbers, we get up to about 30 pounds of boost. Now, boost control short term, drop to 0. Boost control duty cycle is 25.8. We look at the intake air temp, it's 35 degrees, it was extremely cold. We can see the short-term fuel trims is 0.1%, so it's pretty close. We can already see that some throttle correction is going on. We're only 92%, but you can see here in that line that it's starting to drop. Now, this happens to be a Ford strategy for the EcoBoosts for torque management. Actually, they also use it in their naturally aspirated cars as well. BMW has been doing this for a long time. Mercedes, Audi, lots of OE manufacturers have used this particular strategy. And that leads into what might be the next episode. I think just because of how long this one's already going, that'll be its own episode. But we're going to talk about OE strategies. This is an OE strategy. I chose to do it because it works. Now, if we go back up here and we start looking at where we're at, we're just going to take where it first started to deviate, where we were there. We're going to settle on the 90%. You can see 90% right here, throttle position. We're 30.4%. Boost control has dropped to 0%, so it's not adding anymore. 25.8 is what our solenoid duty is. But now if we come down here, we have the boost control output, so same number, 25.8. We can see that our boost pressure error has started to go up because I was correcting for cold air, which your ECU, you need to look, you're going to have an intake air temp correction for target pressure most likely. If you're closed loop, you're going to have a duty cycle. You're going to have multiple tables related to this. So even though I was initially targeting 30 pounds, because that outside air temp and therefore manifold temp was so cold, it had started to change the boost target pressure. So obviously, if we were doing this the right way, the first thing I would do is I would go back to the wastegate duty cycle error correction versus intake air temp and target pressure correction, and I would start changing those because we got a throttle cut, right? It started to close the throttle. Now, this was left this way on purpose though, because I wanted to show you how to use the strategy, or how this strategy can work for you. You can see though that as we get down here, we already had gone over this in the previous parts of this video. See, we got down to that 82% throttle position because we're 1.2 psi error. The boost control is still working. It's trying to maintain target. So the two are working together. The boost target's 29.1. We're 30.2. So it just continues to chop the throttle. So we get down here. You can see our manifold temp has dropped to 33. The boost target is changing a little bit. It's staying roughly 29. That error is changing. But then as we get up in higher RPM, all of a sudden the target error is lessening and our throttle position is allowing, our throttle error correction is starting to lessen as well. See, now we're back up to 86. 29.7. So the two can work together really, really well. Ultimately, yes, you do want to make sure your wastegate duty cycle table is proper and your error correction tables are proper. But this can work as a great safety net, just like how the OE ECU strategy does, to catch potential errors that maybe you overlooked, maybe you didn't, maybe you got into a set of weather conditions that the car wasn't initially tuned for. You tuned it in the summer when it was 90 degrees out, and now it's 30 and it's a cold day, but it's clear. So it's there to save you so that your 30-pound target doesn't somehow turn into a 36-pound target. Anyway, guys, I think that kind of sums up this video. So we're going to come back to this subject, though, and we'll cover a couple other tables that I've made up just for fun, show how they work as far as taking an OE strategy. So anyway, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're having fun with your cars. We'll talk to you guys later. Take care.